I received an email from an applied linguistics student in Poland who asked me a number of questions for the thesis that she's doing on Duolingo and Link and AI and motivation and all the subjects that so often come up when it comes to language learning. And I'm going to show you that interview. And I think it's very interesting that a person in Poland would contact me and that we have this conversation. And it's an indication of where we are today. We are connected. We can connect with people in Poland or in Japan or in Brazil or other countries. I listen to podcasts from Persia, from Iran rather, in Persian. And, I think back when, Montaigne would withdraw to his tower in order to think and write his essays and so forth. Or we have Lao Tzu, the Taoist philosopher, who talks about, I can see the whole world from my window, but the implication was that it's introspection, what we find within ourselves. But today we are connected, and languages are what connect us. If we can speak more than one language, we are able to connect with more and more people. And for that reason, I was very happy to connect with this linguistics student from Poland, and I invite you to listen to our conversation.
So like I said, I'm a applied linguistics student. In my last year, I'm doing my master's thesis, and I'm analyzing Link and Duolingo, talking about the differences between those two apps. I know you've answered this question before, but for the sake of my thesis and this interview, could you just tell me why or what inspired you to create the app?
So when we created the app, I was not aware of Stephen Krashen. I was not aware of the input hypothesis. However, my own experience with language learning, particularly with Chinese, like Mandarin, Chinese, and Japanese, was that I spent most of my time reading, less time listening because it was less convenient 50-some years ago. But even then, living in Japan, I'd get in my car and I'd turn on Japanese. So listening and reading were always a big part of my language learning. And I was between jobs, actually, and I looked at my bookshelf and, I'd always been interested in languages. So I had books in German and books in Spanish, and on the pages are a bunch of words underlined, and I would look them up and forget them, or I would make a list and look them up and forget them. And it's annoying when there's always 10 words on a page that you don't understand, because you kind of get the drift of what the page is about, but you really would like to know what those words mean. When I was a Chinese, like Mandarin Chinese student, a tape recorder was something this big. And then we went to cassette players, which every so often would go, and then you lost the cassette, right? So once I became aware of, very briefly, mini disc players and thereafter MP3 players, I realized, wow, this is a revolution in terms of listening. And then the second thing was digital text. So now you have the ability to do things with the text. Look words up, save words, move them to a database. So once I saw that this was happening, my experience with the massive, the importance of massive input. When I was in Hong Kong learning Mandarin, I read far more than the other students. I was forever buying books. However, when you buy a reader for Mandarin, you have to have a reader that has a glossary for each chapter, because looking something up in a dictionary, a traditional dictionary, is a hopeless task, especially with Chinese. It takes forever, and as soon as you close the dictionary, you've forgotten what was there, literally. So I said, okay, now with technology, we can do things better. So that, I think, was sort of the impetus. There were some other issues. We had an employee at our wood processing and software company who was from China. He really didn't understand in Canada, how the culture worked. And I realized that you need to have relevant input. So we had a bunch of interviews with Rotary Club, business club members talking about what they did. A woman had a travel bureau. Somebody else ran whatever it might be, a real estate company or a construction company. And they talked about what they did. So I said, this is relevant. So record them, transcribe it, and give it to new immigrants so that immigrants can actually get a sense of the society they're moving into. So those are some of the things that contributed to the development of LingQ in the early stages. And it was directed mainly at English for mostly immigrants in Canada.
Oh, okay. Okay, that's surprising. So you thought that the textbooks or wherever are lacking in this like everyday or use texts?
If you grab the average textbook, it's got about 10% content. Most of it is explanations, which are often redundant, in any case difficult to remember. And then they have exercises, which I hate doing. We need more content. I have textbooks in Arabic, for example, Media Arabic, and they have articles from 2015. We're not 2015 anymore. So the advantage with the internet is that essentially everything is language content. And whatever you're interested in, and it's up to date, And so that's far better than, and some textbooks are unbelievably expensive and yet still dated right away. So if we believe, as I do, in Krashen's theory of, compelling input, that's not the way to go. There's no flexibility, there's no scalability. So yeah, I think LingQ is a better solution than textbooks.
Yes. So you actually mentioned Arabic, and I feel like there are languages known for having many dialects.
Right.
And as far as I know, LingQ doesn't offer dialect learning. So do you think that would ever be an option, to have a separate, language learning option only for dialects? Do you think that's relevant or not really?
When it comes to Arabic, we call it all Arabic. However, for some of our basic content, like our mini stories, which is sort of where we get started, lots of repetition, high frequency verbs and so forth, there we offer standard Arabic, Egyptian Arabic, and Levantine Arabic. After that, and because I've been studying Arabic, then I have to go to, MTV Lebanon, or, you have to go find sources, because at LingQ, I can bring anything in. If I have a sound file, it'll transcribe. It makes mistakes occasionally, Whisper AI or whatever. We'll make some mistakes, but by and large, dialects within Arabic. Now, we could have created 3 language slots for each of those. If we ever go to do Moroccan or North African, probably that would be separate. There's some discussion we should have a Quebecois, like a French Canadian, Quebecois, which can be different. So the Quebecois French varies from very standard on, say, Radio Canada, to the average guy in the street who can be speaking a very, colloquial form of Quebecois. Norwegian and Swedish, Indonesian, Malaysian. There's so many examples where the difference between a language and a dialect, it's not that clear. So it's kind of arbitrary. If we have people saying, I would like to have this language on LingQ, and they're willing to translate the many stories and record them, we'll put it up. So we don't have any sort of fixed position on what should be on LingQ. We have Croatian and Serbian. Having spent a little time learning those languages, the differences are minuscule. So if people want it, we put it up. It's so important to be motivated. So if a person says, I want to learn Croatian, or I want to learn Serbian, so we give them Serbian. And to some extent, the content will be a little different. So it doesn't matter to us. It's not any more difficult.
And another question kind of connected to Arabic, because again, you mentioned multiple times the importance of immersion, and so something I talk about in my thesis a lot. However, was there ever a language where you found learning grammar to be necessary, where you kind of chosen a more traditional learning approach?
Some of these terms are used pretty loosely. So grammar is a description of standard usage. I hesitate to say correct usage because all languages evolve. I hear a lot of native English speakers saying, I would have went, which is not today still correct usage, but in 20, 30 years, it may become correct usage. We no longer say to whom. I do, but a lot of people never say to whom. So usage evolves. So grammar describes usage. I think everyone who learns a language wants to use the language in the way that's most useful. So if, again, we talk about Quebec. If I live in Quebec, I want to use Quebecois usage if I'm doing business with Quebecois. So we all want to use the language in a way that suits our purposes. Now, if you study rules of grammar, that can help you notice things. The question is, how much time are you going to spend on that? So is it going to be 50%, 10%? How are you going to engage with the rules of grammar? Are you going to spend your time going over these conjugation tables? In my experience, when I was learning German, I only started to improve when I stopped trying to ingest the declension tables, because it's largely a waste of time. So it's there. It's a part of it. I wouldn't say it's zero. Arabic has has complicated grammar. Persian is not so complicated, but their forms are different. And so to develop a habit of using that form of usage, reading the rules doesn't do it. It can help you notice something that you are already aware of through massive input, but it's not a shortcut to using the language correctly. But yes, we all want to use the language, shouldn't say correctly, but we want to use the usage that's useful for us, which might be the usage in Lebanon, it might be Poland, maybe, I don't know, Western Poland version, I don't know the dialects in Polish, but you kind of want to adapt to the languages used around you.
Definitely. So let's take German, for example, because I also study German together with English. So you completely stopped learning all the conjugations, all the endings to words, or just...
I became more realistic. I realized that I will gradually develop new habits, and that studying the declension tables, because in German it's more the declensions, it's more the adjectives of the nouns rather than conjugations, which is like verbs, right? I realized it wasn't doing much for me. And there is this thing, you can only push so much in. If you're trying to push the same information over and over again, the brain doesn't want it. There is proof that when they measure the brain and how the brain deals with language, that seeing particularly verbs, but a number of like vocabulary items in the sort of variety of contexts in which you encounter these words and especially verbs is more important than the frequency. We always think frequency is the key. Frequency is part of the story, but seeing them in different contexts. And the worst example of trying to, learn something is these vocabulary lists or declension tables. You think you're learning, but in fact, I don't think you're learning very much. It may help you notice things the next time you hear, oh yeah, right, I saw that on the table. The other problem with the tables is there's too much information there. It's impossible to deal with a table. It's like when we learn the colors in one go. It's impossible. You have to learn one color, green grass, in conjunction with a particular situation, and the brain has an easier time learning those. So it's not that I never look at those tables. I do. Nowadays with online dictionaries, like the ones we use at LingQ, many of them have, there are conjugating dictionaries. They all have extensions that allow you to see that word as part of a conjugation table. That probably does something. I tend to look at that, but it's not how we have to ingest so much of the language that some of these things become natural, habits.
Yeah, I agree. With German, it's also... it's nice that all the endings are pretty similar. It's something that I noticed. Sometimes when you speak, it's kind of difficult to notice which ending someone has used, so it doesn't really matter.
And also we should not worry about it. If speaking German, or even worse, a Slavic language, where there are all these different, endings, declension endings, you're going to get some earlier than others. The instrumental in all the Slavic languages is the easiest because it's kind of unique. It's a bit on its own, right? But between the dative and the genitive and stuff, it's very difficult, and masculine, feminine, neuter, it's very difficult to try to remember those while you're speaking. But I find that I develop better and better habits. Then if I don't use the language for a while, I get worse. It doesn't inhibit comprehension. Basically, it doesn't inhibit comprehension because the language is so redundant. And so if you're able to understand and listen and read, your brain is gradually developing better and better habits.
Like I said, I'm also comparing the LingQ with Duolingo in my thesis. And I talk about the gamification methods in Duolingo. And I know that you, of course, know Duolingo and you've used it. And LingQ is completely different. There's no gamification. But do you think you would like to apply or add those methods to LingQ ever?
I mean, there are some elements of gamification because the biggest motivation for me is the subject matter. So right now I'm doing a podcast series in Persian, which is very clever. And Abbas, who puts out these podcasts, he talks about subjects that are very interesting for me. So I'm motivated by what I'm learning about.
Yeah, by the topic.
But we have all kinds of sort of nudges, measurements, goals, coins, maintain your streak. So I don't know if that's gamification. Things other than the sort of intrinsic motivation in the subject matter. So we use these tools. We also have, when we go to sort of looking at it sentence by sentence, then we have these matching pairs, which is better than a long list of flashcards, which I find not very useful. So we have these matching pairs, and then we have a chance to translate the sentence from your native language, number to rebuild, which is a form of gamification. So some of those things we do. I'm not involved in designing LingQ, but I think that's about as far as we want to go. The biggest, I think, difference between us and Duolingo is that we allow you, whatever we do in the way of gamification is built up on content that is of interest to you and that you chose. Whereas the biggest difficulty I had with Duolingo is they impose content on you, how you are going to progress and what you do next. And none of that happens at LingQ. At LingQ, you can start wherever you want. You can progress as quickly as you want. You can choose whatever content item you want. And the functionality, and to the extent that we have gamification, it'll apply to content that's real for you.
That's true. That's also the difficulty I had with Duolingo. It's fun, at the beginning when you're starting with the language, I guess, but then it's kind of difficult to progress, I feel like. Okay, another hot topic is artificial intelligence, of course, AI. So ChatGPT and all the other AI programs that I don't know about yet. And I know that you've used ChatGPT for language learning. So just generally, what do you think about AI in language learning as someone who developed a language learning app that probably also uses AI?
So again, I'm not involved in the development side, but I see that we're doing. There's a lot of areas where AI can help. The first thing we did was to make sure that the translations of words were context appropriate, because we rely on third-party dictionaries. And a typical third-party, any dictionary will give you 3, 4, 5 potential translations of a word. So we want to make sure that you get the translation that's appropriate for that context. I use that all the time. That's very helpful. I guess AI helps us to transcribe MP3 files to create a lesson. We want to use AI to help learners develop, a range of content that is compelling for them, that suits their interests. We're looking at using AI to help guide learners through LingQ so that they can get more out of LingQ. I think we're just at the beginning. Whenever I start a new language, and this was true for Polish or for Arabic, I do our mini stories. Now, the mini stories, the way it's structured is sort of 2 different points of view, like he and then they, or yesterday and tomorrow. So it's actually the same words in a different time or different tense.
Yeah.
And then you have the sort of a statement, question, answer. And the answer can be negative or positive. So you're getting interrogative, you're getting, positive statement, negative statement, a whole lot of things around essentially the same vocabulary. So that's the model. Well, we had to write those 15 years ago. Now AI can write those. AI can localize them. Right now we have the same story, which is translated into 50 odd languages, from Punjabi to, English. But now we can localize them. So if you're in Turkey, it'll be tea, not coffee, maybe. I don't know. But to some extent, they can be localized. So even in creating content, I have used AI to create content in Turkish. Give me a 1,000-word history of the Ottoman Empire. AI can create 1,000 words on the Ottoman Empire, which I can then import and start learning from. So the sky's the limit. We're only beginning. And the AI is evolving. And we have people who are specialists in AI. And we're looking at how we can introduce it to make the learner's experience better.
I don't know how long ChatGPT is, but I think it's only been around for 3 years, maybe. So before that, at the beginning of LingQ, you had no AI?
No, LingQ is 20 years old. AI is much more recent than that. So, the first time I became aware of AI at LingQ was when we were increasingly, able to transcribe audio files into a lesson. So if you're following a podcast, if you're able to get the MP3 file, which isn't always the case, then we can create the lesson. In other words, it'll transcribe it very accurately. So I think it's early. I think it's early days. Some people like to talk to, a chat box. I can envisage a situation where a person is learning Polish and they're going to visit Poland in 6 months. And the chat GPT could create a lesson about walking tours in Warsaw or Krakow. And you can be listening to it. And then you can even ask questions while you're driving in your car. And this is all going over the same vocabulary in slightly different forms. So I think we're just at the beginning. We're scratching the surface when it comes to AI.
I agree. I also teach, and I have been using ChatGPT to create my lessons a lot. And I think it's very helpful. Sometimes it gets a bit weird, I think, mainly because it's so new and it's still learning, but it's super helpful, definitely.
What be aware of, I'm sure you're aware of, is not everything that ChatGPT spits out is accurate. If you say, give me 10 examples of the instrumental case in Polish, for example, not all of those will be instrumental case.
No, definitely not. If you ask about English, usually it's correct because I guess it's more familiar with the language.
Right.
But yeah, the deeper you dig, the worse it gets, I feel like. I also wanted to talk about the future of LingQ and AI. So are there any new features or innovations planned that you can tell me about?
We are adding languages in response to requests from people. Very few of the new languages generate a lot of users. So there's not really a very big motivation to add new languages, except that our users ask for them. So Irish Gaelic we're going to be adding, we added Punjabi. Insofar as features, our major motivation, more than adding new functionality, the difficulty with whenever you add functionality, you increase complexity. And we're more motivated right now to look at ways that we can make it easier to use LingQ, more pleasant. So the user experience, so customizing the content to the user's needs. I don't know, because that's not my specialty, but I think we're going to look at increasing ways we can use AI or other ways, design, to make it more user-friendly. Again, the trouble with customizing is it has to be a flawless transition to customization. You can't constantly ask people, are you interested in A and B? And then if then that. And anything that complicates things is bad. Kind of like Netflix. If you look up a movie, then the next movies that are suggested to you are similar. So, and we do that to some extent already in our library. So I think those are the kinds of things that we want to work on. The other thing, too, is you have to appreciate that at a site like LingQ, we're constantly working to make the site more efficient. Browsers are constantly changing. It's the whole back-end database, how it has to change, how we can use AI to make things happen faster. Those kinds of things are going on all the time.
Yeah, I think that's it for me. Again, I'm really, really thankful for the interview.
Could you please sort of explain what you study, where you are, your interest in languages, just a little bit of background, which I think would be interesting for my viewers.
Yeah, I study applied linguistics in Poland, in Poznań. I study German and English, little bit of Spanish. I chose English because everyone can speak English in Poland, and the most important second language in schools. So that was a no-brainer. But then I also moved to Germany for a year, a bit over a year. I went to art school there. Then I came back to Poland to go to college. So I thought, I don't want to study philology. I'm not that interested in that. So I thought applied linguistics is perfect. It's just a language. It's just translation. I can work as an interpreter, translator after that. So that was perfect for me.
Right. Okay. And I should say your English is amazing. I always feel that people who speak another language well, who use the language well, who totally understand everything and have a slight accent, it's certainly more impressive than someone who speaks poorly but has no accent, which rarely happens. But so I think that what you have achieved in your English is really all one can hope for.
Not very too nice, but thank you very much. Thank you very much. But like I said, I have been learning for a long time. Everyone has to.